Hello, and welcome to the Doctor's Inn. I'm Marcia Boyles, and as usual, I'm joined by my partner in this show, Dr. Camille Sethi, who is, all of us who use the medical center are very aware, is one of the fine doctors over at the medical center. Dr. Sethi, we have, I think, a really interesting topic today. I'm excited about it only because I know so many folks here will be very interested in the topic. Tell us what it is.
So I'm going to start off rather than with a statement, with a question.
Oh.
Yes. And so the question is, we're going to talk about hypertension, high blood pressure. So the first question is, what is hypertension? And different people have different ideas about what is high blood pressure and where should we call it elevated and abnormal. And so the next question is, who makes that decision?
Who sets those standards?
Yeah, who makes that decision? Is it your doctor every single time? Or is there another overarching body that makes that recommendation? Because you know, over the years, our definition of high blood pressure has continued to change.
Yes.
It seems like we can't quite make up our minds. It used to be that we would say we want the blood pressure to be lesser or lower than 140/90. 140 being the systolic, or the pressure at which the heart pumps blood out, and the diastolic, the lower one, being where the heart is relaxed. So we used to say 140/90. Then we changed and we said it should be 130/80. Then we changed again and we said 140/90. And now we are saying it should be less than 130/80.
Less than 130.
Less than 130/80, although 130/80 is acceptable. So the question is, who is making these decisions and continually changing the standard? So these standards are set by what is called the Joint National Committee under the aegis of the NIH. So there is at least comfort in knowing that it's done under the auspices of NIH.
Of experts.
Yes, of experts. Having said that, I'm going to lay out a caveat at the very beginning, and that is, it's great when we set these standards, but what we need to ensure is that we understand that one number is not a fit-all. And so even though this definition comes to us from the Joint National Committee, and the last report is called the JNC 7, and there will be a JNC 8 because they keep coming with new recommendations, that notwithstanding that, ultimately what your blood pressure should be, what is optimal for you, has to be personalized to you. I could not say, for instance, that everybody who comes must have a blood pressure less than 130/80, or I'm going to put them on medications. So while we have that standard, and you might hear that on the news or read it in the paper, please understand that that number is not fixed in stone. Okay? So the other thing that I should say is that having made the comment that one number doesn't fit all, in our particular demographic, we don't want to push that standard too much. We don't necessarily want everybody's blood pressure to be 130/80, because the blood pressure is meant to be measured when you're sitting down, preferably after you've been sitting down for 5 minutes and you're relaxed. So how often do you come to the medical center, you're sitting for 5 minutes in your chair and you're relaxed before someone dashes in to get your blood pressure?
Never.
Almost never,
Yes.
right? And so it would be optimal if we measured blood pressure at home, and we'll talk more about that later. So when we say somebody has high blood pressure, we ought to say that the blood pressure is consistently elevated. So in other words, you come to the medical center one day for a sore throat, and I find that your blood pressure is 150/80 or 85, and say, aha, you have high blood pressure, now I must put you on medication. That would not be the right approach. So we need for the blood pressure to be consistently elevated. it is also better if that blood pressure is measured in your usual ambient circumstances, doing whatever are your normal daily activities, right? Because we well know that if somebody is anxious, that can cause their blood pressure to go up. So are we going to take that blood pressure and say, oh, we got to treat this? Absolutely not. The other problem, of course, is that as we define blood pressure, we're talking about blood pressure when you're sitting down. But what happens when you stand up?
What does happen?
So normally the blood pressure should not drop, but in some individuals it does.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
Actually drops rather than,
Yeah,
I mean,
it can.
That seems counterintuitive.
That's true, but sometimes it does drop. So, you know, dizziness is a common complaint here.
Yes.
And dizziness has many, many causes. There's no single reason. But amongst the common problems one can find are sometimes people are dehydrated, or, you know, they've just taken their medication before they come in. Depends on the time of the day and what else is happening. So if you stand up and your blood pressure drops and you become dizzy and you fall down, then if I have your blood pressure perfectly controlled sitting at 120/80, then I have failed you because I've let you have an adverse event. So the purpose of blood pressure control is to prevent complications, but if we are creating a complication, then we have to be mindful of that. So if anybody comes in, they've fallen down or they're dizzy or they have a fast heart rate, we try to check the blood pressure not just sitting but also standing up. So normally the blood pressure should not drop. But if it drops, then, you know, we may have to think about what is the optimal blood pressure for you as opposed to what the standard is.
Okay.
Yeah.
That all is making perfect sense. All right.
And if I may, one other thought. Let me mention, some individuals will actually come in whom I've never seen before and say to me, my blood pressure is a little high, but I don't want you to be concerned about it because I have white coat hypertension. Now, in the days that the doctors all wore white coats, you know, people would think, oh, I'm going to go get my blood pressure checked, I'm going to see the doctor, and so the white coat, the white coat hypertension. And so it's consistent blood pressure elevation in your usual ambient circumstances. As I said, we'll talk more about blood pressure monitoring moving forward.
All right, you are you going to get into the notion of purchasing blood pressure cuffs?
Sure. So this is a perfect time for us to talk about it.
They've gotten so improved.
Yes, they really are much improved, and they're very easy to measure.
They are easy.
Yes.
Yes.
And if we want that your blood pressure should be controlled doing what you do every day, then we don't want an episodic reading, which is what we will get when you're at the medical center.
Right.
So going back 20, 30 years ago, it was recognized that, you know, blood pressure is very dynamic. It's going to continue to change. Even if you took 3 readings on yourself within a period of 5 minutes, they would likely all be different. And so the idea was that just like, you know, sometimes people have to wear a heart monitor for an abnormal heart rhythm, probably a lot of folks have heard about that, the same way that we should also measure blood pressure in an ambulatory setting. And so you would be able to have a monitor which would record your blood pressure over a 24-hour period. Somehow insurance companies didn't want to pay for it and Medicare didn't want to pay for it, so it never got off the ground. So the next best is having a blood pressure cuff with which you can measure your blood pressure at home. So there are wrist cuffs and there are upper arm cuffs. The upper arm cuffs are really preferable. And so what I recommend to those
in terms of accuracy?
Yes, and so what I recommend to folks who've got blood pressures that require changing the medications because it's not stable, I recommend that they measure their blood pressures at home. So you can get a good blood pressure cuff anywhere from $30 to $50. You don't need anything fancy.
Can you get them that cheaply?
Yes, oh yes. And basically all you've got to do is slip the cuff up on your arm. It's fully automated. You just push a button which says start, and then it gives you a reading. Okay? So what this best way to measure the blood pressure then is to do it at home, and depending on your doctor's recommendation as to how many times a week you should do it. On the days that you do it, you should do it twice. You should do it in the morning around 8 o'clock before breakfast, assuming you're not waking up at noon, and then once before dinner. So the reason to choose those timings is not convenience. It might seem that way, but it's not. The reason is because our body has a circadian rhythm. It has a circadian rhythm for everything, really, and every cell in our body, believe it or not, has a biological clock. So our blood pressure also has this biological clock. Counterintuitively, you would think that after you've had a good night's sleep or you've rested, your blood pressure should come down. And that is accurate. However, because of the body's circadian rhythm, the blood pressure is highest in the morning and lowest in the evening. So if you routinely only measure your blood pressure in the evening, you will not know what it is in the morning. And you may say, well, why does that matter?
Is that true of all people?
It's true of, I'm not going to give you an absolutely precise figure, but I'm going to say that's true in more than 95% of individuals. Oh, okay. It's very uncommon to see the circadian rhythm reversed. In other words, high in the evening and low in the morning. So when people get really high blood pressure and they've not been on any medicines, amongst the first things to happen is both the morning and evening pressures will be raised. But the body's natural rhythm is high in the morning and low in the evening. Now let's go back to why it's high in the morning and its importance. It is because the body makes the maximum amount of the cortisol hormones, and that level is maximum in the morning. That's why the majority of heart attacks and strokes occur between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. Okay. So we do need to know what that high blood pressure reading is. So we need that morning reading, and then we need the evening reading, so we can be sure that we keep your blood pressure at a reasonable level so you don't bottom out in the evening. And most of the time when we're giving blood pressure medications, we can adjust the timing so that, you know, we can keep it sort of even, you know, so that we don't have a high reading and a really low reading. We want to sort of
What kind of deviancy do you see between morning and evening generally? 10%, 20%?
It can be. It can be. It varies. It depends on what your baseline blood pressure is. If you have high blood pressure or if you have a normal blood pressure. So for instance, you could have a normal blood pressure which is, you know, 120 over 80, and if you measured it at 4 or 5, it may be 110 or it may be a little lower. No reason to worry. That's the natural low. So think of this another way. Everybody has a natural low in the afternoon. You know, people want to get a cup of coffee or something,
Yes.
3 or 4 in the afternoon. That's your natural low. Just like for sleep. You know, you wake up in the morning and then as the night comes along, you begin to feel tired and you think it's time to go to bed. That is that circadian rhythm. So there are those natural lows. When the cortisol levels are the lowest is when the blood pressure is going to be the lowest. So it's really important to focus on that morning number because of the heart attacks and strokes, you know. So the general recommendation then, depending on the particular individual, is to measure it in the morning and in the evening before dinner. And I say don't do it more than a couple times a week. What we don't want to do, sometimes when people don't feel well, they immediately want to go check their blood pressure. So that the focus changes from not feeling well and trying to identify what the matter is to focusing on what the blood pressure reading is. And that is not a reasonable way to connect the dots because they don't necessarily connect. They may, but most often that's not the case. So, you know, there are some symptoms that can be from high blood pressure, such as somebody's having...
low.
and for low. But typically for high, when someone's having chest pain or they're having a splitting headache. So if we measure the blood pressure at that time, that would be okay. But in the routine, just because you don't feel well, you say, all right, I'll check my blood pressure. So sometimes people are checking their blood pressure half a dozen times a day. Please don't do that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So should we talk about how common is this problem?
That was going to be my next question.
All
How
right.
common is this, Dr. Sethi?
It is one of the commonest problems all over the world. In the US alone, we've got close to 110 million adults, and a third of them have high blood pressure, and above the age of 65, 1 out of 2 individuals have high blood pressure. Yeah.
So half of our population, for example.
Yes, absolutely, if not more. And so what we do know, and there's a reason for it, what we do know is, we know this from some very important studies which have been sponsored by NIH, that as we age, as we get older, from infancy, childhood, teenage years, adult years, that the blood pressure steadily continues to rise. So that's the natural history of blood pressure. It's not the same in a child as it is in an adult. And it continues to go up. So, we don't, even for children now, it's recommended that there should be an annual blood pressure reading. But for adults, that should definitely be the case, that there should be a blood pressure reading, because it is such a common problem. But more than just the number of folks who have high blood pressure, and it doesn't really apply to those who live here, is that half of those who do have high blood pressure are not well controlled, particularly if they have heart disease or kidney disease. And so we need to be mindful, because hypertension or high blood pressure is a vascular disease. So it affects blood vessels all over the body, right? So we need to be sure that we try and control it as well for that individual. Generally speaking, less than 130 over 80. Maybe permissive, what we call permissive control of blood pressure, so people don't fall down, because as they stand up, instead of the blood pressure going up, it's going down. We may say 140 over 90. So generally, those are the figures we are looking at: 130 over 80, 140 over 90. Under some special circumstances, we may want a lower blood pressure, but we won't go into those, because those are certainly not common circumstances.
All right. That's really quite astonishing that it's half of our demographic.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So what else do we want to talk about?
The causes. What
Yeah,
causes?
the risk factors. Who is likely to be at risk? So we already mentioned age. As we get older, blood pressure tends to go up, particularly the systolic. This is the upper number. Okay. The second thing we want
They used to say that they used to say only one number was significant.
That's not the case. So we know, again, from wonderful studies that have been done, that both the systolic, the upper number, and the lower number matter. So we have to be attentive to both. So in addition to age, we want to think about sex. I use the word sex rather than gender. Sex is how you're born, gender is an option. Okay. So blood pressure, as we get older, tends to be higher in women than in men. So again, that's something to keep in mind.
I didn't realize that women were more prevalent in terms of high blood pressure.
As we get older, not a huge percentage, but significantly so.
Okay.
Yeah. So the next thing that we should mention, which may speak to the increasing incidence and prevalence of hypertension, is lifestyle. So exercise, or rather lack thereof, our salt intake, obesity. Yeah, absolutely, obesity. So as you know, we have an obesity epidemic in the country. And then as we get older, as we slow down, exercise goes down, that further increases the risk of weight gain. Right? So that's important to keep in mind. Salt intake is very important too. So naturally occurring foods don't contain salt, right? If anything, many of the vegetables The fruits are, of course, sweet.
Well, now, meat has salt in it naturally.
Yes, but I'm talking fruits and vegetables, for
Oh,
instance, do not have salt.
Right.
The meats, yes.
Right.
So if we look at the average American diet, our salt intake is very high. And about 3/4 of our salt intake comes to us from processed foods, not from cooked foods, but from processed foods. So as an example in point, think of the cereals, okay?
Yes.
The boxed cereals, the ones that children get and the ones that I personally love too. So one of the ones
Most
that
of us eat them.
yes. So the one that we often think is pretty healthy is Raisin Bran.
Yes.
Right? It has raisins in it and it has bran
Right.
flakes.
Right.
What can be wrong with it?
Right.
So the next time you buy a box of Raisin Bran, or if you have one at home, read its salt content.
Oh.
So the way to know your salt intake is to start reading labels. So vegetable juice, V8 vegetable juice, that itty bitty little can,
Yes.
or tomato juice, wonderfully low in calories
Right.
and tasty. But read the salt
Yes.
content.
There is low sodium, I think, V8 now.
Yes, but it's still high.
Is it?
Campbell's tomato soup. Again, there is a low sodium soup now. But if you read the salt content, you'd be shocked. You can get 1/3 of your daily salt intake just with a cup of soup.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the good news is, from what I understand, the food at Green Spring is not salted, or
Well,
at least
mostly it's
mostly,
not.
very lightly salted is what I'm
I
told.
mean, they buy sub-processed food.
Right.
If you eat a hot dog, it's going to be a hot dog.
Right, right. Or cheese. Cheeses are very high in
Cheese.
salt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Crackers. So, salt is ubiquitous in our diets. And that's why the majority of it is coming via processed foods. But to get back to the total salt intake, so the average salt intake in the American diet is about 3.5 grams a day. And if you try to reduce the salt intake, you can probably get to like 2.5 grams or close, so which is a reduction. But is that still good for you, the 2.5 grams? The answer is no. And we'll talk about diet later, but as we talk about how do we prevent high blood pressure, much has been said and written about what is called the DASH diet, DASH dash, which stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And dietary approaches to stop hypertension with low sodium, or DASH diet with low sodium, is probably the best diet in the world. And you can read about it, but basically it emphasizes keeping a low salt intake while eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and reducing animal protein intake. So, because that's going to reduce the amount of fat that you have in your diet, right? So I think that insofar as risk factors are concerned, and when we get to prevention, we'll talk about this, there are things that we can't change, but there are those that we can. How we eat, we can change. How much salt we eat depends on us. And if you are doing any cooking at home, one easy tip is that when you cook, don't cook with salt. But if you sprinkle a little bit on afterwards, that works very well. And it reduces your salt intake by 50%.
All right. You get the same flavor effect, but...
Yeah, yeah. So why does it matter if you have high blood pressure? I guess most folks, know that you
Is
can...
there a genetic component, by the way, too?
Yes, they can be. They can be.
Okay.
And the genetic, thank you for bringing that up, the genetic component can include difficulty in handling salt and getting rid of it from the body.
Okay.
So when you reduce your salt intake, your blood pressure gets better. So there is a genetic component too. So the complications are well known to everybody, so we won't belabor them. Heart disease, whether it be coronary disease or congestive heart failure, strokes, we're all familiar with that. Kidney disease. One of the commonest causes of kidney disease.
And I don't think that's a well-known fact.
Yes, but we did talk about it when we were talking about
We
chronic
talked
kidney
about kidneys,
disease
yes.
last time. Then peripheral arterial disease, you know, people having pain in their legs when they walk. There can be many, many reasons, but at least amongst one of them can be high blood pressure. And just like you can have disease in your kidneys or in your heart, likewise you can have disease in your peripheral vessels, in the arteries, so peripheral arterial disease. And then of course there are aneurysms too, much less common. So the common ones are known to all. Hypertension is a vascular disease. The commonest killer in the country is vascular disease, and that in and of itself is a good take-home message. So you treat high blood pressure not because it's causing too many other symptoms, because its outcome in terms of vascular disease is bad.
Yes, I mean, isn't it known as the silent killer?
It can be silent, yeah, but sometimes it clamors for attention and we ignore it.
Okay. In which case it's not the silent.
Yeah. So, you know, to talk about prevention is just simply how do we prevent blood pressure from getting worse or getting high. Foremost in this is lifestyle changes.
Okay.
And if we look at what we do, where do we want to park our cars when we go to the grocery store? Closest to the store.
Right.
My recommendation is park furthest from the store, so you walk a little bit. Folks at Green Spring walk a lot, so that's a good thing.
Many of them do, yes.
So keeping the weight down, cutting back, you know, on those extra pounds, trying to lose weight, exercising every day. How much exercise and how? 30 minutes, 5 days a week is good. But if you can do more, that's even better. And if you can introduce some cardio in it, strengthening exercises, that's great. The fitness center here is readily available, and I would recommend that to everybody. But if you're just walking, that's very good too. Okay. So in addition to that, the diet. So the DASH diet, again, is a takeoff from the Mediterranean diet. So more fruits and vegetables, fewer
Olive
animal
oil.
protein. Yeah, olive oil. If you have heart disease and you use olive oil, it improves your outcomes no matter what. So olive oil, you use it for all your cooking. I don't know what we use for cooking at Green Spring or within Erickson,
No.
but that would be a fabulous change.
Why don't
if
you
it were
find
chewable.
out? I mean, you would be the voice of authority there.
Oh, I don't know about that. I would be happily relinquish that position to anybody who wants to take
I
it.
see. Well, you know, I think it's something we could find out.
Yeah, yeah. And then reducing fat intake. Everybody loves ice cream at Green Spring,
They do.
but ice cream has, it's a two-part word, ice and cream.
Right.
So if we just don't merge the two and keep thinking cream, 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 maybe we'll back off a little bit from the ice
Maybe
cream.
sherbet, sherbet, sherbet.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So, you know, I think the important take-home messages in terms of hypertension are keep your weight down, exercise, eat healthfully. And if you do have high blood pressure, speak with your physician about checking your blood pressure at home intermittently so that you can maintain the best control. Keep your salt intake down, be a label reader for everything that you eat at home. And olive oil is always good.
I think in some instances you may want to, if they're going to take their blood pressure, they're going to need to get a cuff.
Yes.
And how would you suggest that they figure out how to do that?
To get a cuff,
Uh-huh.
just speak to your physician. Some insurance companies will cover it.
Oh, they
So
will?
I write a prescription and I say blood pressure cuff, and I put the diagnosis for hypertension.
They can get, they
Yeah,
actually can
some
order
will.
it through CVS, I believe.
Yes, you can. No, I think they have them available in the store.
Yeah. Yes, I think they do, and or they can
Yes,
order them for
absolutely.
you. So it's not difficult to get.
Yep. You can also get it from Amazon.
Oh yes,
Costco.
Online, we all know how
Yeah.
to do that. It's folks that are not online that
Yes.
can,
yes.
can definitely go to CVS. I had no idea insurance companies.
Some
Could
do.
pay.
Some do. And it would be a smart move because for $50 you would have
Well, I was going to
better
say, and you're
controlled
saying
blood
they're
pressure.
not all that expensive these
That's
days.
correct. That's correct.
I see we have only a minute left. Anything you'd like to leave us with in terms of this topic?
Yeah, so as I said, you know, if you don't know your blood pressure, please know it. That's the first step, know your blood pressure. because knowing your blood pressure means that you are empowering yourself to prevent complications, the most serious complications, such as heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, peripheral arterial disease, aneurysms elsewhere in the body. Remember to exercise. Remember to eat
I believe
because
you've
you
said
like
that
to
before.
eat. Remember to eat because you like to eat and enjoy the foods that you like, but you don't have to make a meal out of every food that you like. You can savor it and truly make it a treat for yourself. And walk and exercise and, you know, keep the salt intake down. More and more people are eating seasoned foods instead of adding salt. Curiously enough, Mrs. Dash's, the seasoning
Yes.
has been around for a long
Yes,
time. I think
yes.
it's curious that the acronym DASH
Yes.
speaks to dietary approaches to stop hypertension. There's no connection between the two, but that's just the way it is. So you can still enjoy your food and, you know, deal with the problem that is extremely common. Half or more than half of
Yes.
folks have it. And can we deal with it? On a positive and accurate note, the answer is yes. We can control blood pressure. No matter what your blood pressure is, we can control it.
Well, I think on that hopeful note, this has been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia.